Hi, Denise. Thanks for joining today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Denise G, I am so happy to have you. We had, with podcasting, we meet people in different ways, shapes, and forms through referrals or networks. And how we came to meet each other is like, kind of through a podcasting group. And
Mhm.
I had a chance to, really kind of look into some of the things you're working on. You're a life coach, you're a
Mhm.
prolific writer of blogs, many, many blogs. You have your own podcast, which is
Mhm.
incredible. So, I always got a warm spot in my heart for other podcasters. We're out there, hopefully doing the good work, or at least we feel like we are sometimes. And maybe sometimes we're not, but or we don't. At least we don't feel like it always. But I think we are. Telling the stories and getting out there for people to help heal themselves and nurture and grow is an essential part of I really believe for giving and being of service. So we had a little chance to kind of connect prior to jumping on here, and there was a term that you just said. So if you could say that, so the about the inner overwhelming, and then I wanted to add a little bit of thought to it before I hand the mic back over to you. But what is that kind of what was that? It was the inner overwhelming, or how did you say that?
I literally just enter overwhelm, and
Okay.
we could go through a little more scientific kind of way, but what I'm basically saying in plain speak is that either one of your senses, your sight, your sound, your smells, olfact, all that stuff, or your thoughts are overwhelmed to the point where you're not able to be present either
Mm,
physically, emotionally, or spiritually with yourself or the environment around you. It causes a form of paralysis. You're stuck and you don't know what to do, and then it results usually in overwhelm.
okay. Beautiful. Well, thank you for expanding on that. Because when you first said that, I
Mhm.
almost had a little bit of because it's one thing when you share something, but it's also how we receive it. And how
Yep.
we receive it through the filters and the sensories of how we interpret stuff. So when you said that, I did have the thought of the frenetic energy of the day, but when you explain the actual sensory, your environment, and
Mhm.
the inhibitors that maybe will become placed in the process of either decision making, thought process, how we can take just one next step. And I'll be honest with you, I believe as people, we all experience this. I think as either business leaders or solopreneurs or people that really put themselves out there that have a tendency to pile on the responsibilities. I know I've done it many times in my life where I
Mhm.
just continue to stack stuff on. I'm like, let's add another project. And the overwhelming, there can be analysis paralysis, or it's sometimes hard to get field awareness or to take that one tiny little step somewhere because you just can't see past your nose. I'm saying that I've
Mhm.
added into my own world to
Mhm.
create some of that rigid, I'll call it the electricity and the frenetic inputs that are maybe just wheels here, but then you add it into your external environment. And now you're being pulled in many different directions, phone calls, emails, and everything else. So you create the surroundings and the environment around that. That again is how I interpreted that. I would love to pass the mic to you and have you expand on this because as a life coach, you've worked with many people, and I can only imagine the scenarios you see along the way.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm thinking about one particular conversation where a person was telling me about his time in Fallujah. He was an army vet and having to put his best friend in the body bag and then having to go back to war the next day and seeing things that no human being needs to see and helping hold the space for someone in the midst of that. And then going to a completely different conversation with someone who's had multiple abortions and then dealing with the emotional aftermath of that. I'm not sitting here and telling you that these stories or any way, shape, and form the same. But it's like, what do you do when you're confronted with things that really challenge you on a lot of levels? They challenge your ideas of what suffering is, challenging your ideas of how much capacity can you hold for another person, how much energetic space can you give and receive in that moment. And that's just in my own professional capacity. But let's talk to the average business owner here. They may not be talking with someone who's had varying states of distress and traumatic event. I'm 1 hour talking about my marketing efforts. Then I'm dealing with a customer. Then I'm shifting from different different tasks, but I'm still revolving around the same idea of keeping my business afloat, right?
Mm, yeah.
And that's something a lot of people don't really give themselves credit on. I'm shifting from one thing to the next, and I need to have a level of composure, a level of stability, a level of awareness. And if you're not aware of how your body is responding to each and every moment and pivot, producing stress hormones that are actually debilitating to the point where you're having heart palpitations, your mind is wandering into 5,000 different directions. You're trying to micromanage your own thoughts in the midst of trying to talk with somebody. There are so many different ways it's showing that there is or overwhelm. And unfortunately, most people don't realize that until they have dealt with the brunt of workaholism, finding addictions, compulsive codependency. I love calling it image management problem, where you're
Ooh,
so
image
stuck
management.
image management, where you're so focused on trying to make sure that you try to control the big feelings of another person, even though you're not responsible for them.
Yeah. Does perfectionism kind of fall into that as well with
You
the
know,
image management?
yeah. So let's think about what perfectionism and I used to like brag about this in like my 20s. I remember going on a job interview, first I interviewed, and they said, "What's something that you really need to work on?" And I remember with a straight, "I'm a perfectionist." And the interviewer, my manager at the time, said, "Oh, really?" And he opened up his drawer and showed my. Said, "I see there was a lot of errors here that could have been easily resolved." So it kind of caught my perfectionism, and what it really was. The perfection was, I don't know how to handle the fact that people recognize my humanity.
Mm,
I
okay.
don't know how people can react to the fact that I don't know everything and I want to be viewed favorably. I'm afraid of losing affection. I'm afraid of ultimately safety and security. So what perfectionism, what we're really talking about is I need to find safety and security at all ends to the point where I'll compromise my mental, my emotional, my physical energy to make sure that I can control things that are which are out of my control a large part. We can't
Yeah.
control other people's perception of us.
That's powerful. Because there's an externalization there too, where we're placing the power external of us and trying to sway, trying to interpret, trying to impose, or trying to gain or gather somebody else's affection or attention. What's interesting too is a lot of the stuff you kind of talked about, and you mentioned that survival. So there's those deep kind of like the root chakra stuff or the survival. Sometimes there's things that real or imagined to us, they feel real in the sense of, I kind of associate it too with the resources. We'll talk about money for a second there. And it's the resources of money in the sense that, did I chop enough wood to last the winter? Do I have enough smoked meats or whatever to survive the next 6 months? Or that proverbial, like the deep DNA stuff where this feels like life or death, like I'm making a life or death situation here. But then in actuality, my life isn't threatened. I'm not losing the shelter, the family's okay. But there's these times where even the simplest things feel so deep, and the association and the connection points with that. And I know I took perfectionism to a little bit of different direction there, but you touched on that deep survival. And I think there's some really root sourcing from people's, how they approach things, decisions,
Yeah.
motivations.
Yeah, if I may,
Please.
I'm going to talk about it from two different angles. I want to talk about it from the psychological, the mind, and the neurological, because there's two different things that are going on simultaneously. And a lot of people, they wonder, like, why do I feel so anxious? I mean, Paul, to be honest with you, there were many years I would wake up with a hot flash in my heart beating, and I didn't even really know
Yeah,
what was going on. I would go to bed ruminating about all the coulda, woulda, shouldas, and the
yeah.
anxiety was so overwhelming. And I had to understand it from those angles. And there's also a spiritual component. I definitely will like, I'm not discounting the spiritual component, but I think for a lot of people who are business owners or intellectual, they're like, well, forget about
Let's
the
stay in
whole,
that. Yeah. Let's
yeah.
stay in the
So
window of that neuroscience and psychology. It's
yeah.
extremely,
So let's talk about the psychology, right? And you talk to a therapist, you talk to anyone who's doctor or whatever, the healing medical space, and they say, well, your issue is, And then they talk about you haven't become fully self-actualized. And then everyone talks about that little triangle from Abraham Maslow, and that when you're fully self-actualized, you won't be aware and concerned about all these other things. But wait a minute. If you grew up in an environment where you were conditioned by your parents, your family, Uncle Jimmy down the street, whoever, that you're only as good as the value that you output, if you don't find a consistent cash flow every month, if you're not able to share your concerns without being judged, condemned, or criticized, it's kind of hard to think about your role in the universe.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree.
So a lot of people trying to leapfrog to that like Obama, like Oprah Winfrey level, where
Yeah.
we're thinking about like, well, I'm just going to think about the kids in Haiti. And
Mhm.
well, the reality is you need to be thinking about feeling good about your present reality.
Yeah.
That's the psychological aspect.
Hmm.
People were trying to leapfrog over the things that need to be taken care of emotionally because getting into those deep, scary emotions about how you felt about your worth, your value, how people treated you, your perception of how people treated you impacted you on a deep, deep level. And that's causing you to feel constant anxiety about having to control how people perceive you.
Mm,
That's a psychological aspect, right?
that
There's
makes
a
sense.
wonderful book by Dr. Bruce Perry. He wrote a lot, but one of them he co-created with Oprah Winfrey. I just mentioned her right earlier, and it was a book called "What Happened to You." And in the book, is geared toward people who are trauma survivors, of various different things. And one of the things that Dr. Perry mentioned is that fact that when you're in a sense of high stress, right,
Mhm.
your IQ drops as much as 20 points.
Oh, wow.
And the reason behind that is because when you're fully immersed in situations where you are unable to, and I mentioned earlier, have a good handle of your senses, right? On
Mm,
top of cognitive biases, when I say thought think errors that may not be true, magical thinking, overthinking, underthinking about your role and stuff, like there's a lot of stuff going on. Anyway, when all those things are colliding, right? There's a little part of your brain called the amygdala.
mhm.
And it's kind of, you might have heard of it. It's kind of like the
Absolutely.
reactionary part of your body. And if it doesn't feel calm, right? Your sympathetic nervous system activates and you're releasing hormones like norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, and it's causing your body to literally either fight, right?
Yeah,
Defensive,
yeah,
where flee,
yeah. Or just
fawn,
go quiet and recess into your mind and your heart space and kinda shrink up or something like
that's
that.
freeze. That's
Yeah.
freeze. You talk about freeze, literally, right?
Mhm.
Faint. Or here's another one is fawn. People don't talk about fawn. Fawning is where you are literally over apologetic. You see, it wasn't not my fault. Is what had
Oh,
happened was, I think you're a really great person. This is what I consider the situation, and you've heard it. It comes
oh,
as
yeah,
over apologetic. That's
yeah.
fawning. That's a stress.
Okay.
If those areas are not handled either on a psychological or a neurobiological level, where you're allowing your nervous system to calm and reset, your mind will constantly self-betray you into doing things and thinking things that are
Mhm.
actually giving you more stress. And you will visualize more things that are actually scaring the bejesus out of you.
Yeah. If I may, I was gonna say is, um, I think you might have said this too, is about waking up. You know, I've had these times where I'll wake up in the middle of the night and just feel anxiety.
Mhm,
Just
mhm,
and it doesn't. I don't. Is it like I don't even know if it's mine. You know, just feel like in. And I think what happens too is I've noticed something where if I wake up and have anxiety, sometimes then I'll use my maybe creative imagination and I'll start filling it in. We'll be like, well, I'm probably anxious because of this, 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 and the work situation. Okay. And then I've started obsessing about that
mhm,
because the surroundings of my environment are quiet. It's middle of the night.
Mhm.
and I can see start filling you like backfill. So I always found that to be a very interesting aspect of the psyche from a personal observation aspect of not necessarily waking up because of the specific thing, waking up with the feeling and then fill like backfilling in information. I always just found that to be, because we're sometimes when we observe ourselves, we're some of the best learning points or subject matter, that we can experience or see these things kind of play out. So, is there something kind of in that? Well, two things. One is there's something there. The other is with the amygdala too. I There's a recent, we'll call it a, I don't know, title or a term. I guess we could call it amygdala hijacking.
Mhm.
And I just kind of recently heard that term as well. Um, but kind of going back to the backfill or the imagination of something. I guess what would be your take on that? Kind of hearing the backfill or the imaginary of feeling something first and then imagining and filling it in with identifiable. And I think you kind of touched on it, but is there thought on that?
Yeah. So I want to let's talk about the nighttime first,
Hmm.
and then we'll go to the filling information because I think both things need to be touched on. There's a wonderful book. It's not very well known by Carl Jung. He wrote the Red Book,
Yeah,
also known as the Dream Book. Have you heard of it?
I've heard it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. It was one of the scariest books he wrote, and to the point where it actually terrified him in the production of his book. And the reason why was as he was writing the book, he was tapping into his own unconscious thoughts. Here's the thing. We only are aware of 10% of our conscious thoughts at any given time.
Okay.
90% of it is unconscious.
Hmm.
When we allow our bodies to be at rest and we are in that realm, rapid eye movement, that kind of zone, that's when our psyche is finally allowed to tap into that 90% zone. That's all the stuff that you pushed to the back of your mind. You thought it was no big deal. You rationalized it,
Sure.
whatever, right? And you just couldn't or wouldn't deal with it because of the situation, because of your own emotional capacity, whatever, just lots of reasons.
Hmm.
When we are waking up and we're having that heart palpitation, all that stuff, or our mind is ruminating, what we're finally doing is allowing our minds the space to examine that 90%. And
Mm.
that is scary stuff. Oh, whoa. I want to tell a story and then I'll go into the other part. I had wonderful, wonderful mentors, Paul, who helped me on my own trauma healing journey. One of the things that I learned about is the power of healing through spiritual unconscious methods. One of it's through dreams.
Hmm.
I had this one dream, Paul, and I kid you not, I was in this Sherlock Holmes situation where I was Sherlock Holmes, which I'm like a female black Sherlock Holmes. We'll just go with it, right?
I love
And
it.
I'm in this castle and I'm searching for Moriarty, right? I'm searching for, and I'm going through these tunnels and and I see him going through these different areas. Right when I think I see his face, I see my father.
Mm.
There's a point to this. And at the end, when I think I catch him, he turns into a spider and he catches me. In
Ooh.
that moment, I realized what my subconscious was trying to tell me. All my whole life, I was always trying to find validation, comfort, and support from him because he was emotionally unable due to his own probably issues. I
Sure.
realized in my process of trying to find him and trying to chase him, he was catching me in my own web of desperation. And
Mm.
that was revealed to me in a dream. After that dream, while I processed it and I worked through that, I realized what my unconscious mind was trying to teach me through that.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's that.
Powerful. Yeah.
What we do as human beings, right? Let's talk about the backstory, right? We love trying to create narratives to explain the unexplainable. And here's the funny thing about humans. We're irrational, we're unpredictable, right? And
Hmm.
we're sometimes befuddling. We don't know. And so despite all that, we try to sort of figure out the rationale based on our own biases, our own unprocessed feelings. And the best way I can explain it is you're driving down the road, right? And someone cuts you off in traffic. And what's the first thought most people think when you get cut off in traffic and you're trying to get somewhere?
Yeah, well, usually a cuss word might come to mind, or a little bit of irritation or anger. Like, yeah.
Where's the anger coming from?
Oh, it's a good point. Yeah, impatience, or no, not even impatience. I think, well, generally a lot of that stuff is a reflection or a mirror. And that's a great question. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, you said anger. Anger
Yeah,
is an expectation or couldn't
there you go.
have happened,
There
right?
you go. Thank you for articulating it, because was that the feeling that I was feeling, but I couldn't articulate it. My expectations of the world, of how people should act, how the world should form around me and respond to me driving. I need to get somewhere. Who are they? There's that. And it's a really quick response too, because you calm down. But there are those times where you get off and you're like, oh, they're just silly little creatures. Just let them do what they're going to do. So there's those states of being that we're in that we have the responses to. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
grab
no,
the mic there,
no,
but that was a
no,
fun one to play with.
no. But I'm glad that you said that because in our mind, we've got all these narratives on what they couldn't, wouldn't do, right? If I were them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when you think about it, if you were them, would you even take the time to understand them?
Yeah, no, no. There's times in my life if I was in a hurry or something and I was kinda just doing this, I mean, I'd like to believe I'm not driving erratically, but if I would, I'm just stuck in my agenda, my thing, and I wouldn't, like, whatever that person, the projection of putting that, or the empathy or the understanding to place myself in those other shoes
Well,
can.
I'm not even talking about empathy and understanding. I'm just getting brass tacks of how we fill in our minds with stuff that it is not even necessarily based on reality.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And a lot of people are so caught up in their agenda, right, that they never pause and consider maybe he was rushing to see his wife who's in the hospital.
Sure.
Maybe he's got some car problems and he's feeling fearful of driving too much further from his final destination. There is a zillion and one scenarios. Do I say that our solution is to fact find every single situation? That's not the point, right? The point is, what information do we need to know about ourselves in a situation? And are we okay with limited or no information? Are
Right.
we okay with shrugging, going, well, that was weird? And
Yeah,
then continuing to listen to whatever's playing on your radio.
yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. So placing ourselves there, could we jump to empathy and what that means too? I think
Yeah,
that's a
no,
great
I
launch
love it
point.
to talk about empathy because I think a
Yeah,
lot of people confuse empathy with understanding, and they're not the same.
okay.
They're in the same ballpark.
So let me play
Yeah.
with it a little bit. I'll chew
Yeah.
on it, and then,
Okay.
because this is fun. I like kinda, very transparent in that way. To kinda jump on something you also said too is that, we're very creative creatures and we're complex in the sense that we could show up in situations as happy and angry all at the same time and bring all these things to the table. But, self empathy and understanding, it's interesting to put those in the same arena. I never really thought of it, but I'm trying to think of empathy. The idea in my thought process would be to place myself in somebody else's shoes or have the deep understanding. So I'm starting to realize that you saying they're different, I'm lumping them together. And then there's compassion and awareness and being mindful that I see as tying into empathy. But I also think that it can be a little bit the bookends of that. There could be the loving aspect of that. And then there could be the aspect of the allowance and like, well, it's okay. Just do whatever you need to do. Then you get into the personal values of yourself and the allowance of how somebody else is treating you. Probably bigger subject than anything. But I'd love to hear your take on kind of that empathy and understanding. If there's a distinction there, or a clinical distinction, or a psychological one?
Okay. So this is a heartfelt message to you and everyone else who is listening to information that if you are a person of just a lot of passion and and just and just sympathy and just care for your fellow human being. If you have an empathetic approach to everyone, you will
Yeah.
lose your mind. It's not helping you on a grander scale with everyone. And let me
Mm.
explain why. There will always be hungry kids in Africa. There will always be gun violence. We will always have some climate issue going on. Our heart beat. There's a phrase called compassion fatigue. You can only go so long trying to think about every single person that has gone through pain in your life or even stories that you read on the news.
Yeah.
And if we're trying to just have our hearts like just torn in 5,000 different directions, it will just literally rip us apart
Yeah.
at the seams. Okay. And I don't mean to say that that is rationalizing a callous approach. Well, it's their fault. Their fault. That's their country. That's their issue. I don't need to be bothered. Right? That's not what I'm trying to say. When I'm talking about understanding, right? I'm talking about awareness of situations that you can control and things that you can't control. And awareness also means I understand that people are going through situations that I may not be able to provide a solution for.
Absolutely.
And that is compassion within itself. I think people think that you have to be empathetic in order to have compassion. Compassion can coexist in understanding as well as empathy.
Okay.
Empathy meaning that literally, I'm not just walking in your shoes. I'm also trying to co-create an energetic experience between the two of, if possible, to help improve our co-reality. And so what does that look like practically? I have a son. He's 8 years old, going on 85 mentally. It's my own fault, has a moment like me. And he was having an argument with his daddy about cleaning up the kitchen area after dinner. And he was upset. He was tearing. And I said, "Hey, let me talk to you for a second." We went into my bedroom. And I said, "Let's just." I have a little red light in my bedroom for holistic purposes, a whole different subject. And I said, "Let's go on the red light and just chill." We turn on the red light and we're just kind of talking. Paul, do you think I'm necessarily talking about what he experienced with his dad?
No, I
No.
wouldn't think you would. I think you'd be just, were you identifying with them and more of a trying to place the understanding of the source expectations or
Yeah. I would say, "Hey, bud, you were stressed. I saw you crying. It was really rough.
yeah,
Where do you feel like you needed the most support?" Yeah. Listening. Are you open to some advice? How can I be with you right now? And then we wandered off and talked about space buddies and what Mr. Beast was doing and fun jokes that he was thinking about. The conversation weaved and went into completely different directions. And I was with him wherever he wanted to travel with me.
yeah, that was beautiful. And
Empathy isn't control, it's just being alongside them and asking them, how can I support you in the process? And presenting options for them to consider, not mandates.
yeah, that's very powerful because I think there can be a tendency for rescuing people or compromising yourself, not your own cup, not putting on your mask first. And I think we do, especially with the children too. I know there's times where I've kind of wanted to rescue them through this or try to carry the burden. And they're on their journey. And it really is about the support. I couldn't agree more with that sense of the identification and the understanding, but not necessarily just understanding, giving them the allowance and the support within the structure, but not at a cost to me, if that's a fair way to say it, you identify with, but not at a detrimental cost to me with the responsibilities of employees and family and everything else. And the candle at both ends and don't take care of things like my body, don't work out as much, because it's always the to-do list. And I know that's a bit of a broad stroke on it, but sometimes we start to spend those attributes and they're at a cost. So we continue to give at a cost and put everybody else before ourselves. So I think there is a deep importance to allowing us to be as strong as possible, so we can show up even better and stronger and more secure and supportive for other people.
I have to say something that's on my mind as you were talking about this. So I don't mean this to say like I approve or disapprove. at all, this
Mhm.
particular person, but I just want to give an example because we're talking about responsibilities as being a business owner, as a parent, a partner, whatever. And the first thought that came to my mind was talking about the richest man on the earth as we're having this conversation in January 2025, Elon Musk, right? He
Mhm.
runs several companies, X, Boring, SpaceX, Tesla, whatever. Do you think he has time to be micromanaging operations on all of his companies simultaneously?
Oh, not at all. Yeah. No way. There's no way he can micromanage all that. He'd lose it. Wouldn't be able to spread himself that thin.
He's got like what, 9 kids, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then he's a prolific poster on X.
That was good. That was a little that was good.
Right? So there's a lot of stuff going on. He's a human being and he only has 24 hours in a day.
There's all of us, yeah.
And yet still, we think we can operate like a robot. And we see people who operate like robots. And they also talk about their ketamine addiction. They talk about, and so nobody talks about, I want to try to control everyone and everything and never realizing the cost of that behavior.
Yeah.
So when I talk with people who say, I really want to try to keep a handle on everything, what I'm basically hearing from someone is you have a grandiose expectation of yourself and your value. And like,
Mhm.
so what do these people want to do when you drop dead? The world will stop spinning.
Right. Not at all. It'll keep going.
The best thing we can do as leaders, right, is empowering the people around us to keep it moving while we're not moving. And if we feel like we have to try to over explain, guide, coach, mentor, self soothe, what we're trying to say is, I feel anxious within my ability to lead and delegate and guide
Mhm.
instead of providing the tools and letting them fail on their own. Because failure is how we grow. I'm
Yeah.
depriving my people of growing by not experiencing reality.
There's a book about leading with
All in the other.
vulnerability. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and, leading with vulnerability, and there's a lot of great lessons he shares within that arena, and creating an environment that's safe enough to have those autonomies and have people kind of fall and fluster, and it's kinda like, the toddler, it's just like, well, they fell down a couple times and like, "Ah, that whole walking thing's not for you. Let me carry you around in a cart forever," like, at some point, you gotta build people up, and it can be hard, and I've definitely been guilty of, especially just kinda doing everything, like, "Okay, well, it'll take me 20 minutes to explain it to you. I'll just do it." That type of mentality, so you just start owning everything. You're really cutting yourself off, and you're doing that other person a complete injustice for their growth perspective and them to be a contributor. It's like you're saying, like, I don't trust you, just pushing them off in that arena. And I think as a part of our leadership journey, I'm sure I don't want to say we're all, I shouldn't assume anything, but I think many people, are guilty of that, in some small ways, some big ways. To add on to what you were saying, that are autonomous and without us, and in many cases, even stronger without us, finding people that are more intelligent at certain skill sets or talent stacking than us is a skill of its own. And what an empowering situation to not be so caught up in our egoic expectations of the world around you, to be the answer. I have all the answers. And what an exhausting space to have to hold that up in. It would be unachievable in some respect. But I guess where it came off with, you worked with a lot of leaders in that space, in the vulnerability space, or maybe you have a different term or thought about that to kind of help create and help to nurture that, because you kind of touched on it. But if you have a little bit more depth on kind of being a good leader and helping those next steps.
Yeah. One of the wonderful things I love talking with my clients about is uh, emotionally preparing to scale.
Mm,
Everybody talks about, I want to grow my business. I want to
yeah.
make more money. But what they don't want to talk about is transitioning from a technical solopreneur mindset to a pure creative mindset,
Hmm.
a oversight mindset. And it's not the same. If you spent 10 years being your own accountant, bookkeeper, web design service, sales consultant, all those hats, you're pretty good at it. and you've made it so repetitive and formulaic in your mind, it feels weird to let go of the wheels and give it to somebody else.
It
But
does.
if you want to actually enjoy your time with your partner and your kids and not fear colorectal cancer amongst other issues,
Yeah, or heart issues and whatever, you know. Yeah.
it's time to start learning how to scale. And scaling starts with your emotions about that. When I
Mhm.
speak to entrepreneurs, usually what has happened was they spent a lot of time and a lot of hours alone, emotionally neglected,
Mhm.
feeling unworthy because they never felt anywhere safe to share. And then when they did share, they were surrounded by people who were jealous of their time, envious of stuff that they think they should have for logical reasons, but that's a different issue. And then like dealing with all of that and saying, well, in order for me to grow my business onto the next level, I've got to not only acknowledge all that pain and hurt that came from growing a business. It is a painful experience growing a business. And nobody talks about the emotional stuff that comes with that experience, as well as expectations of losing your identity. If you've been spending all your time doing all the technical aspects of every part of business, do you still feel like you've got that edge? Are you still
Yeah.
part of the situation? If you more hands off, more creative oversight role, that's an identity shift. So all of those things will have to be addressed as part of the scaling process. But everyone wants to talk about the metrics and hiring people and doing all this stuff, but no one talks about what happens. And what I find oftentimes, if those emotions aren't dealing with, they will self-sabotage. And this is what it looks like. You've hired a team. So let's talk about something stupid like widget building. All right.
Mhm.
And you've been spending the last 15 years building your own widgets, right? But you've got a team because you want to build to a different type of nuts. I'm just saying, with nuts and widgets, whatever.
Yep. Yep.
But you're caught up in widget mode, right? And then you go to the team and like, I think these widgets should be done this way. No, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. I want to make sure these widgets are in this line. Next thing you know, you're in there on the factory line building again.
Yeah. And it is true. And I think too is that there's identification, and I do speak from experience because of in that evolution as a leader, then adding employees and things like that. It can be easy to get critical, and it can also be easy to allow. I don't want to say easy because that is a level of judgment, but there can be levels of allowance of even letting those employees, or as you help to try to grow their interpretive views kick back to you. There's an identity when you're working 100 hours a week, 7 days a week as a solopreneur, and then you scale it. It's really hard to unprogram that because I've experienced this, that duty and the guilt. If I'm not sitting at my desk, if I'm not working, there's a guilt that I've experienced over time. And then there's the allowance of the employees being like, when they're huffing it, but you're trying to do the creative work, and thought work is very powerful. And that stuff you're doing it all the time. And the employees are like, but I'm doing the work. And then it's kind of that, like, kind of like, well, what are you doing? I'm doing all. So there's those things you can allow that if you're not secure and not aware of it, there's those feedbacks that you allow to dictate or change your behavior as you develop as a leader is almost kind of even a lot, kind of being able to understand the differential of what's true feedback and taking on these different loops or different influence sets as well too. So I just kind of went off on a little rant of some of the pains and kind of coming back into that. But the identity one, when you said that, is extremely powerful to change what you feel is your identity as this, I'm physically working to make the widgets to then turn it into cylinders, or use the word nuts or whatever, now widgets to cylinders. And now, without being on the line doing it or boxing up the product, like somehow I'm not working that hard, but
Yeah,
you're doing
I
that
want
plus all the
to.
thought work.
Yeah, I want to dial into something that you mentioned that I think a lot of entrepreneurs who become leaders, you- when
Yeah.
leading teams, don't really realize is that if you're focused on a process oriented mindset, you will find people who match and mirror you. And
Mm.
so if you hire someone and you're just thinking about output, making sure things are done, you're gonna find someone like that. and they will resent your creativity.
Yeah.
And they will literally enable your self-sabotaging process because
There
they
you go.
literally found exactly your fear and they just amplified it
Yeah.
versus hiring someone with the mindset of you need to do you and this is what do is and I need to be and this is what be is. If you cross into my being zone, you're not doing anything for
Yeah. And thank you. You kind of really articulated that piece that I was trying to convey there. Um, so yeah, growing and scaling very fast as well. I've experienced that in my career as well. Like we're scaling so quick, and now all of a sudden I have a room full of generalists or people that are wearing many hats. And then you get into the people that have the specific talents and then working to place them, which really is just a dovetail into what we're saying as well. The transitioning of the teams as the teams go and that evolution of who I say not me, but as the leader, it continually, I guess where I'm going is the continued growth because it's not a fixed point, it's a process and it's a continuation. It's a infinite game versus a finite game
me.
in those arenas. And I guess to have the awareness and to continue on that thread of really being that deep leader. It just triggered a memory too of something that you had actually written about. It was really about the ambition versus addiction. And what's really calling in that addictive thing, we can become addictive to our patterns so heavily. And that's where some of the things guilt can set in and those default programs and kicking back in there. But if you could add some thought process on that kind of mindset and or what I'm saying is the ambition versus the addiction. And one last thing, is there a sense of applied addiction, meaning a very heavy focus in there, or maybe that's a misuse of the word?
My eyes are gazing downward because I'm really trying to think about how I
Yeah.
want to measure my response. Oh boy. All right. So let's talk about ambition first.
Mhm.
All right. Nobody puts their capital, their time, and energy on a whim. Nobody puts all their business online. Nobody makes endless posts. Okay. At least sane people don't do that.
Yeah.
There is this idea, this dream, Paul, of something you can't physically see it, but you know energetically it exists and you just want to realize it.
The
And
intangibles or okay.
intangibles, absolutely. And so you have these ideas that trigger actions, that trigger behaviors, that lead to decisions, that support an overall dream.
I love that.
Okay. So we're talking about ambition, right? Addiction is not the same. Okay. It seems the same. It's like a strange little cousin,
Okay.
like, but it kind of creeps around the corner and masquerades as ambition,
Mhm.
but it's not the same. So when I think about an addiction, Paul, I'm thinking about a jumble of fears, anxieties, and compulsions
Okay.
that masquerade as something to provide an ease from discomfort.
Mm. Okay. Do me a favor, and I hate to ask you this, but can you kind of repeat that a little bit? Because that was really powerful, and I wanna soak that in again, selfishly. So
The addiction or
it's
the
about the
ambition?
addiction. No, the addiction, 'cause it was you had all those descriptive words in there, so that was a
Yeah.
really powerful statement.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll say what word for word. Forgive
That's okay,
my
you don't have
those.
to. Okay,
Okay.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but just the essence of that again.
Yeah. So addiction masquerades as a strange cousin of ambitions and is
Mhm.
literally fears, anxieties, right? And compulsions that
Compulsion, yeah.
support, that cover over a desire to either maintain control, either have an image or facade of wellness, or
Mhm.
just a form of just trying to maintain your own homeostasis.
Yeah.
But to outside, it looks like it's ambition unhinged, but it's an ambition.
Wow,
And
that's
we live in a culture that
Yeah.
glorifies hustle culture. One of the expressions we've always heard is, it's like, "I'll sleep when I die." And I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"What
yeah.
kind of nonsense is this?" Because when we have our body in a high stress physiological state, we're causing cells to mutate, which can actually lead to cancer.
Mhm.
There's a
Sure.
higher percent of entrepreneurs that have cancer over the general population. That's not an accident.
'Cause it's expressing itself in that regard. I can't get over that. I mean, that really resonated with me with the ambition, and it's gonna come out differently, but not intentionally, just 'cause, like, you had a beautiful way of saying it, but the ambition that supports the dream. I love that. And the addiction that kinda supports the compulsions in, the other string of fears and stuff like that, or covers them up to try to get rid of them. And the addiction's almost that short-term ease, like, I just wanna get rid of it. I feel that agitation when you were kinda describing it, but the ambition felt different. That felt the true deep ease of supporting the dream when you were talking about that. So thank you for that. Really resonated with me. I don't want to say difference between, but it is kind of funny when you said that too. They're like the cousin of, and it really can be masculine there because it's like, it's like I'll outwork anybody. It's just the mentality of what that means, and I'll come at it, and you kind of have this. I'm being a little dramatic on how the delivery is, um, but is there's kind of an essence of that, So then creating, kind of into, I think you even wrote about creating the healthy boundaries, for the lasting success in those arenas as well.
Well, boundaries are a whole different subject, but they run
Okay, yeah,
parallel, right? We were raised in the culture. When I say we, I'm assuming you and I were both raised in Western cultures, right?
yeah,
Like, okay,
absolutely.
all right. Because there is like this Puritan, work hard, don't complain, you know, never let them see you sweat type of mindset. And because we are so afraid of losing good a sense of value from other people, a sense of familiarity with how things have been done, because we find a lot of
Hmm.
comfort as human beings to repeat what's modeled with other people, that we don't have a sense of where we begin and where we end.
Hmm.
And so when I talk about boundaries, there's a whole lot of different areas of boundaries, but
Okay.
within the realm of addictions and ambitions is we have never allowed ourselves to fully embrace our unique identity apart from societal standards of what it means to be a business owner and a leader.
Hmm.
And because of that, we bleed out into compulsions, into maladaptive behavior that actually harm us instead of
Yeah.
helping us.
Oh wow, that was deep, by the way. That is incredible. Huh. And it just brings up the pains because there's identification, there's awareness in that, and even that too. But it's also, if I was just going to say this, and harness correctly, it's a beautiful understanding of, personally, I'm just going to use this just selfishly, personally, there's a release in that too, to be honest with you. There's identification with it, the recognition of it. And like, yeah, I can see those patterns that I do in my own activities,
Mhm,
but sometimes just those simple awarenesses can help to start, I'll just say, the release of it, or the adjustment, or the pivot.
mhm,
And whether it's a fast pivot or not, or incremental change, I think those are the real helpful the deep healing patterns that can
mhm.
happen.
Yeah, I'm really loving this conversation, Paul, because as we're talking about this, everybody like talks about boundaries surface level. You don't let them treat you this way.
Yeah.
If they send you messages like, and they the perfunctory thing, like you do this happens, do
Yeah,
that,
right.
and I'm like going basic. I'm like, baby, do you even know who you are?
Yeah.
Like, let's get even basic. Are you even recognizing when you're bleeding out
Yeah.
spiritually? Because a lot of times what we do is we try to cover over and mask with these behaviors, and we're not understanding the root cause of what's happening.
Yeah. So, just had you here for quite a while, and this has been phenomenal. I got like one more question before our kind of time is up here. And I hope it's not too big of a question, but maybe just, when it comes to burnout, I know that's probably a big subject for you. You probably have a lot to add to it, but maybe just some kind of general advice on burnout in the stress world.
Oh gosh, you're right. And I've written several articles just on burnout alone.
And
That's a huge topic. And everyone thinks like burnout is you've just overextended yourself, extended period of times, and you tapped out, meaning
yeah,
like you're lost interest or you're
yeah,
fatigued or you're prone to anger. You know, like we make jokes like in corporate America, like, well, this person needs anger management classes. There's a lot of manifestations of burnout. It just leads to a lot of different paths. But when I think about burnout from a holistic, spiritual, emotional, psychological standpoint, what I'm thinking about is a, a issue of self betrayal. And so let me
mm,
explain what I'm talking about. If you're not clear about your wants and your not wants, meaning that, for example, my want in my life is that I honor what my body needs. Like, for example, I might take a nap in 20 minutes. I don't care what the schedule says, unless you're a client, like, obviously. No. My life revolves around honoring what my body, my mind, and my soul needs. And if
yeah,
I do that because of image management, unhealed wounds, societal expectations, all that other stuff, and I just bypass all of that, or even what my feeling instinctual nature means. I didn't say my thinking intuition. I said my feelings do. As a woman, I'm led by my thinking instinctual, intuitional wants. That's a whole different conversation, but I just wanted to say that out loud.
mhm,
If I'm leading with not honoring my not wants, I don't want to feel stressed. I don't want to feel overwhelmed. And I just say, I'll plow through and I'll make exceptions. Over time, I'll feel stressed. Over time, that stress will lead to overwhelm. Over
yeah,
time, that overwhelm will to burnout. And then what do I do in that moment where I betrayed myself? Self betrayed. Well, this is time where we're going to have to start breaking promises to
mhm,
ourselves and to other people.
yeah. Oh, wow. So the self-betrayal, more recently, that really hit me hard with some stuff, like the realization of my own self-betrayal. That's a super powerful one that I don't think a lot of people are necessarily aware of, that I've observed at least. And it's even on a soul level, like I may be in this situation. It's not that it's bad, but it's not that it's good. But at a deep level, I'm feeling this unidentifiable feeling, and the realization of there's a deep self betrayal in there was an extremely powerful realization I personally had on the journey. I feel like not even that long ago. And then creating the shifts and incremental changes towards it. I believe that that's an extremely powerful message with the self betrayal. Personally, I'm really glad you said that, because I think that's an incredibly helpful thing for people to, at minimum, start to identify with the deep pains. So here, how can people get a hold of you, work with you? What's the best way? We'll link out in all the social media. We'll link you to all that. But honestly, if somebody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way?
Yeah, so thank you again for our time with one another. I think we just touched on
Absolutely.
so many wonderful points, but the best place of people to kind of reach me is to go on my website, deniseglee.com. And I want to call your attention to the banner of my website. This literally says, understand yourself better, take my learn your life script. And what it is I took my time. It's a fit it, and compiled a whole list of questions to help you understand how you may have self betrayed yourself. And it will output some suggestions and some things that you may have not considered. And then also on my website, deniseglee.com, you can also learn more about my story, read my blog. I'm a prolific writer. I have over 100 posts, not just for myself, but other doctors, therapists, thought leaders in healing and leadership. And then also can peruse some of options that to work with me at whatever you need best. So, and then also I'm on socials, on LinkedIn, X, but my website, deniseglee.com is the best place to find me.
Beautiful. Then they can get to all the handles there and stuff too. So awesome. Thank you so much. This was great. Appreciate all the insights, and you really have a depth of knowledge that's just outstanding.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate our time together.
Thanks.